Welcome to Sci-Fi Facts, where every movie hides a secret. Every scene tells a deeper story. And every frame contains details most viewers never notice, from legendary blockbusters and mind-bending science fiction to dark thrillers, unforgettable horror, and hidden cinematic gems. We explore the facts, theories, Easter eggs, behind-the-scenes secrets, and untold stories that make movies truly unforgettable. This isn't just watching movies, this is discovering what lies beneath them. Subscribe to Sci-Fi Facts and step beyond the screen. However, the moment he picks it up, another spacecraft arrives. Several armed soldiers emerge and immediately confront him, demanding to know how he located the orb and why he is there. Thinking quickly, Peter claims he's nothing more than a scavenger who accidentally ended up on the planet while collecting scrap. The explanation fails to convince them. One of the soldiers insists that Peter accompany them to meet their commander, Ronan. Realizing he's run out of excuses, Peter decides to introduce himself with a bit more flair. He proudly declares that he is known throughout the galaxy as the legendary Star-Lord, a feared outlaw and adventurer. Unfortunately, the name means absolutely nothing to Ronan's men. Still determined to seize both him and the orb, they move in. With negotiations clearly over, Peter attacks first. He quickly takes down two of the soldiers and shoots another as the man turns away. Despite being hit, the guard survives and returns fire, nearly killing Quill in the process. Knowing he can't win a prolonged fight, Star-Lord drops to the ground and activates the thrusters built into his equipment. The sudden burst launches him through the air and away from the ruins. He races toward his ship while enemy blaster fire follows close behind. As he runs, Peter tosses a gravity device near the pursuing soldiers. The gadget activates instantly, pinning them to the ground and preventing them from moving. Using the distraction, he leaps onto the wing of his ship and slides directly into the cockpit. Moments later, the gravity field shuts down. Freed once again, the soldiers scramble to retaliate. They deploy a powerful heavy weapon and unleash a barrage of fire. The stream of energy narrowly misses Peter's ship as he takes off, avoiding destruction by mere seconds. The chase doesn't end there. Ronan's forces continue firing while Quill maneuvers through the dangerous environment. He successfully dodges most of their attacks, but a powerful thermal blast strikes his ship and sends it spiraling violently upward. Soon after, the force dissipates, leaving the vessel falling toward the surface with no control. The ground rushes closer and closer. At the last possible moment, Peter manages to stabilize the ship and pull it out of the dive just before impact. With disaster avoided by inches, he escapes Morag and heads into space. The second he leaves the planet behind, an incoming communication appears. It's Yondu, the Ravager leader who kidnapped Peter as a child and raised him among his crew, and he is furious. He informs Quill that he has already arrived on Morag and discovered that the orb is missing. Demanding answers, Yondu orders him to reveal his location and hand over the artifact. Peter refuses without hesitation. He cuts off the transmission and keeps flying, enraged by the betrayal. Yondu immediately places a bounty on his former copyright copyright, offering 40,000 units to anyone who can capture him alive and bring him in. Meanwhile, aboard the massive Kree warship known as the Darkcaster, Ronan receives a report from the soldiers who failed on Mara. They explain everything that happened and reveal the Star-Lord appears to be planning a sale of the orb through a mysterious intermediary known only as the Broker. Ronan wastes no time acting on the information. He orders Nebula to travel to Xandar and retrieve the orb, before she can depart. However, Gamora steps forward. Since she is familiar with the planet and its people, she volunteers for the mission instead of her sister. Ronan approves the request. Her assignment is simple: recover the orb and deliver it to her adoptive father, Thanos. On Xandar, two bounty hunters are scanning for their next profitable target when they notice Peter Quill speaking with a local alien. It doesn't take long for them to connect him to the newly announced bounty and decide that 40,000 units is worth pursuing, completely unaware that half the galaxy seems interested in capturing him. Peter proceeds with his own plans. He visits the broker and presents the orb, hoping to complete the sale. During the meeting, he casually mentions his recent encounter with Ronan's forces. The reaction is immediate. The moment the broker hears Ronan's name, His willingness to negotiate disappears. Terrified of becoming involved with the dangerous greed, he refuses the transaction, hands the orb back, and throws Peter out of the establishment, making it clear that he wants absolutely nothing to do with anything connected to Ronan. Outside, Peter's attention quickly shifts. He notices Gamora and immediately begins trying to charm her, completely unaware of who she really is or why she's there. Confident as ever, he attempts to impress the mysterious woman with casual conversation and exaggerated bravado. Gamora isn't interested. Without warning, she snatches the orb and drives a brutal kick into Peter's stomach. The attack doubles him over in pain while she escapes with the artifact. Determined not to lose his prize, Peter quickly fires an optical tether. The cable wraps around Gamora's leg and yanks her off balance, sending her crashing to the ground. Seizing the opportunity, he rushes forward to reclaim the orb, but Gamora recovers almost instantly. Breaking free of the restraint, she strikes him again before he can secure the artifact. The confrontation quickly turns into a chaotic brawl, with both fighters rolling across the ground exchanging punches and kicks. Despite Peter's efforts, the outcome becomes obvious. Gamora was trained by Thanos himself, and her combat skills far surpass his. After a fierce struggle, she gains the upper hand and decisively defeats Star-Lord. Just as Gamora prepares to finish Peter off once and for all, the two bounty hunters suddenly step into the fight. They quickly intervene, reminding everyone that the reward on Quill's head only applies if he's brought in alive. With Gamora temporarily restrained, Rocket orders Groot to grab Peter, stuff him into a sack, and secure their prize. Unfortunately, the tree-like giant misunderstands the instructions. Instead of capturing Quill, Groot wraps his roots around Gamora, accidentally giving Peter the opening he needs to escape while clutching the orb. Gamora refuses to let him get away that easily. In a swift move, she sinks her teeth into Rocket's paw, forcing the Raccoon to release her. Then she hurls him aside and immediately throws a blade toward Quill. The weapon strikes perfectly, knocking the orb from his grasp and allowing her to reclaim the artifact. Peter isn't about to surrender his payday. He charges straight at Gamora and manages to attach one of his propulsion devices to her leg. The thruster activates instantly, sending her flying wildly through the air with no control over her movements. Believing the fight is finally over, Peter lowers his guard and that turns out to be a mistake. Before he can celebrate, Groot catches him and begins carrying him away like a captured trophy. Meanwhile, Gamora recovers faster than expected. She tears both of Groot's wooden arms clean off, freeing herself from the living tree's grip. Once loose, she heads directly toward the sack containing Quill, but Peter still has one trick left. The moment she reaches for him, he fires a stun weapon that strikes her squarely and locks her muscles in place. Temporarily paralyzed, Gamora can only watch as Peter escapes once more with the orb. His victory lasts only seconds. Rocket, unwilling to lose the bounty, fires an energy projectile that slams into Quill from behind. The impact drops him immediately, sending both him and the orb crashing to the ground. Before the chaotic battle can continue any further, law enforcement arrives. Members of the Nova Corps, the peacekeeping force responsible for maintaining order on Xandar, surround the area and arrest everyone involved for causing public disorder. Soon, Peter, Gamora, Rocket, and Groot find themselves transported to the Kiln, a notorious prison filled with some of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. While passing through intake and inspection, Rocket can't help boasting. He proudly claims that he's escaped from 22 prisons already and confidently states that this one will be no different, insisting he's already working on another escape plan. Gamora isn't impressed. She openly states that she doesn't trust criminals, which immediately catches Rocket's attention. Curious, he questions why someone who works alongside Ronan and Thanos would suddenly act morally superior. Gamora finally reveals the truth. She explains that she never intended to remain loyal to either of them. Her plan is to betray both Ronan and Thanos by keeping the orb for herself. More importantly, she claims to have already found a buyer willing to pay an enormous sum for the artifact. Later, after being processed into the prison population, The group enters the main courtyard. The atmosphere immediately turns hostile. Many inmates recognize Gamora and despise her on sight, because of her association with Ronan and Thanos. Countless prisoners blame her for the destruction and suffering those two have caused across the galaxy. As tensions rise, another inmate approaches Peter. The large prisoner begins threatening him, promising to make him regret it if he doesn't cooperate. Before the situation can escalate, Groot steps in, calmly reaching forward. He lifts the bully by the nose and effortlessly removes the threat. Rocket quickly makes one thing clear: if anyone is collecting the reward on Peter Quill, it will be him and Groot. Hours pass. The prison eventually settles into silence as most inmates fall asleep. During the night, Peter is suddenly awakened by screams. Looking around, he realizes several prisoners are dragging Gamora away against her will. Curious and concerned, he quietly follows them into a nearby locker room. There, he discovers the reason. Waiting inside is Drax the Destroyer. The massive warrior announces that he intends to personally execute Gamora. He explains that Ronan slaughtered his wife and daughter, leaving him with nothing except a burning desire for vengeance. Since Gamora once stood beside the Kree fanatic, Drax believes killing her is a fitting form of justice. While everyone focuses on Drax, Gamora seizes an opportunity. She quickly disarms the surrounding prisoners and places a knife against Drax's throat, rather than killing him. However, she insists that she is not truly allied with either Ronan or Thanos. To prove her sincerity, she lowers the weapon and drops it entirely. Peter witnesses everything, deciding to intervene. He steps forward and attempts to reason with Drax. He points out that Drax's real target is Ronan, not Gamora. If he kills her now, he'll lose a valuable lead. Peter argues that Ronan will inevitably come searching for Gamora because she possesses the orb, and keeping her alive increases their chances of finding and confronting the man responsible for Drax's suffering. After considering the argument, Drax reluctantly agrees. He releases Gamora and allows her to leave unharmed. Later, while speaking privately with Peter, Gamora shares more details about her plan. Although she admits she doesn't completely trust any of them, she reveals that she has located a buyer willing to pay 4 billion units for the orb. The offer changes everything. Gamora proposes a partnership. If Rocket can successfully break them out of prison, she'll lead everyone to the buyer, and the profits will be divided equally among the group. Elsewhere in the galaxy, aboard his warship, Ronan receives a message from one of Thanos' servants requesting his presence at the sanctuary. Upon arriving, Ronan immediately voices his frustrations. He reveals that he has discovered Gamora's betrayal and begins angrily complaining about her actions. However, before the messenger can even finish responding on Thanos' behalf, Ronan snaps the servant's neck without hesitation. Nebula watches the display with visible admiration, impressed that anyone would dare challenge her father's authority so openly. Only then does Thanos finally acknowledge Ronan. The Mad Titan slowly turns his throne and begins mocking the Kree, dismissing him as a spoiled child who couldn't even maintain the loyalty of his own allies. Despite the insult, Thanos agrees to honor their arrangement. If Ronan retrieves the orb, the promised reward still stands, but his patience has limits. The Titan warns that if Ronan appears before him again empty-handed, the floor of the sanctuary will be stained with Kree blood. Back inside the kiln, Rocket shifts his attention toward escape. After carefully studying the prison's security systems, he outlines a detailed plan. First, he instructs Gamora to steal an access bracelet from one of the guards. The device will allow them to bypass security doors throughout the facility, but that isn't the only thing they'll need. Rocket also explains that someone must obtain a specialized battery connected to one of the prison's alarm systems. Without it, gaining access to the command tower and completing their escape will be impossible. The biggest problem with the plan quickly becomes obvious. The battery they need is sitting right in the center of the prison cafeteria, fully exposed and surrounded by security systems. Even Rocket admits that while the plan sounds good on paper, nobody has figured out how to grab the device without triggering every alarm in the facility. Before anyone can come up with a solution, Groot accidentally creates one. Misunderstanding the conversation entirely, the tree-like giant assumes his job is simply to retrieve whatever is inside the container. Without warning, He stretches his branches across the room and reaches directly toward the battery, tearing away the protective cover that shields it in the process. Instantly, alarms begin blaring throughout the prison. Red warning lights flood the cafeteria as security systems activate. Within moments, multiple combat drones descend into the area and open fire on Groot, hoping to force him to release the battery. The strategy doesn't work, since Groot's body is composed entirely of living wood. The incoming attacks barely affect him. He swats the drones out of the air one after another, destroying every machine sent against him. The situation escalates rapidly. Determined to regain control, prison guards arm themselves with heavy weapons and charge toward the cafeteria. Just as the battle threatens to overwhelm the group, Drax unexpectedly joins the fight. Without hesitation, he barrels into the guards and knocks them unconscious. After disarming one of them, he tosses the weapon to Rocket, giving the Raccoon a chance to contribute some firepower of his own. At this point, any hope of a stealthy escape has completely disappeared. Recognizing that secrecy is no longer an option, Gamora rushes toward one of the guards and demands his access bracelet. When the man explains that the device is permanently attached to him, Gamora responds with brutal efficiency. She breaks his arm, removes the bracelet, and brings both the device and its unfortunate owner back to Rocket. With the necessary equipment finally secured, the group races toward the prison's control tower. Working together, the 5 outlaws storm the watchtower, overpower the personnel inside, and seize control of the command center. Guards are thrown aside as Rocket immediately begins manipulating the prison systems. One of his first actions is shutting down the facility's artificial gravity. Suddenly, guards and equipment begin floating helplessly through the air, making it nearly impossible for security forces to continue firing accurately. Now firmly in command of the situation, Rocket puts the final stage of his plan into motion. Using the prison's drones, he creates an improvised propulsion system by attaching them to the escape pod, functioning like makeshift engines to carry the group away from the kiln. The getaway is far from smooth. Shortly before reaching freedom, the pod crashes near the prison's exit, forcing everyone to continue on foot. With guards still attempting to regroup behind them, the team sprints toward Peter's ship, before leaving completely. However, they make one final stop, inside the storage room containing confiscated prisoner belongings. They recover their weapons, gear, and most importantly, the orb. Everything seems ready. Then Peter notices something missing. His treasured Walkman isn't among the items they've collected. To everyone else's frustration, Quill insists on retrieving it. He tells the others to keep moving while he searches for the cassette player that has remained his connection to Earth and his mother for decades. Determined to recover it, Peter fights his way through several guards and continues deeper into the facility. Eventually, he finds the Walkman. Relieved, he grabs it and immediately activates his thrusters, launching himself back toward his ship before the prison can fully recover from the chaos. Once everyone is safely aboard, Gamora admits that she still has no idea what actually lies inside the mysterious orb. Even so, she contacts the buyer and informs them that the artifact is on its way. What she doesn't know is that Ronan has already arrived at the kiln. Furious over Gamora's betrayal and obsessed with reclaiming the orb, the Kree fanatic begins issuing new orders. He commands Nebula to dispatch Necrocraft across the galaxy and begin searching for Gamora immediately. At the same time, wanting to avoid attracting unwanted attention from the Nova Corps, he orders his forces to destroy the prison entirely. His objective is simple: erase the kiln along with everyone inside it. Meanwhile, the escaped fugitives travel to Nair, a bizarre settlement built inside the severed head of an ancient celestial. Their destination is the establishment owned by the Collector. While waiting, tensions within the group begin rising. Rocket and Drax become increasingly arrogant and restless, eventually starting a drunken confrontation outside the bar. The argument quickly turns physical. Peter rushes over after noticing Drax attacking Groot and tries to separate them before things get worse. As he pieces together what happened, he learns that the conflict began because someone insulted Rocket by calling him a monster. The comment clearly struck a nerve. Understanding how deeply the insult affects him, Peter attempts to calm the Raccoon down, reminding Rocket that they are on the verge of becoming unimaginably wealthy and encouraging him to focus on the fortune waiting for them after the orb is sold. The reassurance helps. Shortly afterward, one of the collector's attendants arrives and personally invites Gamora inside to begin negotiations. The rest of the group follows, everyone except Drax. Consumed by thoughts of revenge, he secretly remains behind. He heads to the nearest communication station and sends a message directly to Ronan, revealing his location and intentionally luring the Kree warlord to Nair. His plan is reckless but simple. If Ronan comes personally, Drax believes he'll finally have his chance to avenge his wife and daughter. Completely unaware of the betrayal unfolding behind their backs, the others are escorted to meet the Collector. The eccentric being begins explaining the true history of the orb. According to him, before the universe existed, 6 cosmic singularities were all that remained. When creation began with the Big Bang, those primordial forces condensed into powerful relics known as the Infinity Stones. Each stone contains unimaginable energy. The Collector explains that these artifacts concentrate the power of creation itself into physical form, and possessing one grants abilities capable of reshaping reality and annihilating entire civilizations. Only beings of extraordinary power can survive direct contact with them. Finally, the truth becomes clear. The orb isn't the treasure, it's merely a protective shell designed to contain one of the Infinity Stones, the Power Stone. After revealing the artifact's secret, the Collector asks how the group would like to receive payment, but before the transaction can be completed, disaster strikes. One of the Collector's servants suddenly declares that she has had enough of her miserable existence. Desperate for freedom and fascinated by the stone's power, she grabs the Power Stone with her bare hands. The consequences are immediate. Energy erupts throughout the room as cosmic forces spiral out of control. Violent shockwaves tear through the chamber, sending fragments and debris flying in every direction. Unable to contain the immense power, the servant's body begins disintegrating, and within moments she is completely consumed by the stone's energy and reduced to nothing. The explosion devastates the area around them. Once the chaos subsides, Gamora carefully retrieves the Power Stone and seals it back inside the orb. Realizing how dangerous the artifact truly is, she proposes a new course of action. Instead of selling it, they should hand the orb over to the Nova Corps before anyone else can use its power. Before they can get away from Nair, Ronan arrives with his Kree forces. Driven completely by rage, Drax steps forward and challenges him directly. But all the anger in the world isn't enough to close the gap between them. Against Thanos' powerful herald, Drax is outmatched from the very beginning and cannot even land a clean hit. While Ronan brutally overpowers Drax, Gamora and the others scramble to escape. They steal several industrial mining ships and launch into the air as Nebula and her swarm of Necrocraft pursue them. The problem is that the vehicles they grabbed aren't built for combat. With no real weapons available, Rocket comes up with the most chaotic solution possible. He starts using the industrial ships themselves as projectiles, launching them toward the Kree attackers while Gamora focuses on getting the orb away safely. During the battle, Peter manages to jump onto one of the Necrocraft and seize control of it. Once inside, he turns Ronan's own weapons against the Kree fleet and begins firing on their ships. Gamora, however, soon finds herself surrounded. Realizing she cannot make it back to Quill's ship, she decides to fly the industrial capsule out of Nair, believing the open space outside will give her more room to maneuver and shake Nebula off her trail. But the move fails. Nebula catches up and blasts Gamora's vehicle apart, sending her into open space while the orb is taken aboard the Darkcaster. Back at the Collector's bar, Ronan finishes dealing with Drax. After beating him unconscious, he throws the warrior into a pool filled with celestial fluid, leaving him to drown slowly. Moments later, Nebula reports that she has recovered the orb. Facing long odds, the Guardians make a desperate call to Yondu, striking a deal and convincing him to bring his Ravager fleet into the fight. As chaos unfolds across the skies of Xandar, the unlikely allies rush to stop the attack before it reaches the population below. Inside the Darkcaster, the Guardians continue pushing deeper into the massive cruiser. Their objective is clear. While Peter, Rocket, and Drax fight their way toward Ronan. Gamora heads for the ship's power core. If she can disable the vessel, the rest of the plan still has a chance of succeeding. Unfortunately, she doesn't get there unchallenged. Nebula intercepts her before she can reach the controls. The two adopted daughters of Thanos immediately clash, their blades colliding in a shower of sparks. Years of rivalry explode into the open as they exchange furious strikes throughout the chamber. Elsewhere, near the command deck, the remaining Guardians run into another wave of Ronan soldiers. A fierce battle erupts, thanks to Drax's overwhelming physical power and the advanced weapons Peter seized during the assault. The group tears through the enemy ranks with surprising ease. One squad after another falls before them, then more troops arrive. This time, Groot takes center stage. The living tree unleashes the full force of his abilities, extending sharpened branches through multiple enemies at once and hurling them across the room as though they weighed nothing. The soldiers are tossed around helplessly, completely unable to stop the Guardians' advance. Watching the battle drag on, Ronan finally loses patience. From his command chamber, he raises the Power Stone and channels its unimaginable energy directly into the Nova Corps defensive formation. The results are catastrophic. The massive force field shatters instantly. Explosions ripple across the sky as hundreds of Nova ships are destroyed in moments, devastating the fleet that had been protecting Xander. Back inside the cruiser, Gamora finds herself still locked in combat with Nebula, determined to help her friends no matter the cost. She grabs hold of Nebula's electrified staff and endures the full surge of energy coursing through it. The painful gamble works. Nebula loses control of the weapon, taking advantage of the opening. Gamora delivers a devastating kick that launches her sister completely out of the ship and onto one of the nearby Ravager vessels. With Nebula finally out of the way, Gamora reaches the power controls. She shuts down the Darkcaster's systems, disabling critical functions throughout the cruiser and opening the secured pathways her teammates need to reach Ronan. The Guardians finally confront their target. Rocket immediately puts his faith in the Hadron Enforcer and fires the weapon directly at the Kree warlord. The attack lands, yet to everyone's shock, Ronan survives. Empowered by the Power Stone, he absorbs the damage and retaliates with a blast of cosmic energy powerful enough to send the entire team flying across the chamber. Drax recovers first. Driven by years of pain and hatred, he charges straight at Ronan. The Kree warrior effortlessly catches him by the throat, holding Drax helplessly in the air and cruelly mocking the deaths of his wife and daughter. But while Ronan is distracted, another attack is already coming. Rocket makes a desperate decision. Rather than firing more weapons, he pilots his ship directly toward Ronan's position. The collision triggers a massive explosion that tears through the Darkcaster's structure and sends the enormous cruiser crashing toward the surface of Xander. The situation becomes hopeless. The ship is falling. Everyone inside is moments away from death. That's when Groot makes his choice. Without hesitation, he spreads his branches throughout the wreckage. Countless wooden tendrils extend outward, wrapping around his friends and forming a massive protective sphere. The living shield encloses the Guardians completely. Groot knows exactly what will happen. He sacrifices himself to absorb the impact that would otherwise kill them all. Moments later, the Darkcaster slams into the ground. The crash devastates the surrounding area, but the Guardians survive inside Groot's protective shell. When the dust finally settles, citizens and emergency crews begin approaching the wreckage to help the survivors. Then something unbelievable happens. From the ruins emerges Ronan. Despite the crash, despite the explosion, and despite everything the Guardians have thrown at him, he stands completely unharmed. The Power Stone continues to protect him. Now standing before the people of Xander, Ronan prepares to deliver the final blow that will destroy the planet once and for all. But Peter Quill has one last idea, and it's completely ridiculous. As Ronan begins his triumphant speech, Peter suddenly starts dancing. Not fighting, not shooting, dancing. The bizarre performance leaves everyone confused, including Ronan himself. For a few crucial moments, the Kree warlord becomes distracted by Quill's absurd behavior, and those few moments are all the Guardians need. While Peter keeps Ronan occupied, Rocket rapidly rebuilds the Hadron Enforcer. Once the weapon is operational, Drax fires it directly at Ronan's hammer. The attack succeeds, the weapon shatters, exposing the Power Stone. Without wasting a second, Peter lunges forward and grabs the stone with his bare hand. The effect is immediate. Cosmic energy surges through his body. His skin begins cracking apart as the unimaginable power threatens to tear him to pieces. Death is only seconds away. Refusing to let him face it alone, Gamora reaches out and grabs him. Drax joins next, then Rocket. By linking themselves to Peter, the four share the destructive energy coursing through the stone, dividing the burden between them and preventing any one of them from being completely consumed. Together, they endure the impossible, and together they master the stone's power. With the Infinity Stone finally under control, the Guardians unleash its energy in a concentrated blast aimed directly at Ronan. The beam strikes him head-on. This time, there is no surviving. Ronan is completely disintegrated, ending his reign of terror forever. With the battle won, Gamora safely seals the Power Stone inside one of the containment spheres. Not long afterward, Yondu arrives, expecting to claim the orb for himself. Peter already anticipated this, knowing Yondu would likely sell the artifact to someone just as dangerous as Ronan. He secretly switches the containers. Instead of receiving the Power Stone, Yondu leaves with another capsule containing nothing more than a strange and rather ugly doll. The Ravager leader remains completely unaware of the deception. As peace returns to Xandar, Nova Prime personally welcomes the Guardians to headquarters. There, she informs them that their actions saved countless lives. As a reward, the Nova Corps has repaired and upgraded Peter's ship. Even more importantly, every member of the team has had their criminal record erased. For the first time in a long while, they are no longer fugitives. Before leaving, the team plants a small sapling grown from Groot's surviving branches, preserving a piece of the friend who gave everything to save them. With their mission complete, the newly formed Guardians of the Galaxy board their ship and depart Xandar. Behind them, the Power Stone remains secured within the custody of the Nova Corps, at least for now, because somewhere in the shadows of the universe, Thanos, the Mad Titan, has not forgotten about the stone, and his arrival is only a matter of time. Before even talking about the movie itself, I think it's worth addressing the noise surrounding Guardians of the Galaxy. When this film came out, it didn't arrive quietly as just another Marvel release. It came in on a wave of excitement, and the kind where suddenly everyone was acting like they had just witnessed something historic. The IMDb rating was huge. The audience reaction was loud. Reviews were glowing. And for a little while, it felt like this movie was being treated less like a fun summer blockbuster and more like some kind of instant classic. I get it. When a movie catches people off guard, the reaction can become bigger than the movie itself, especially with something like this, where a lot of people probably walked in expecting very little. These weren't exactly Marvel's most famous characters. This wasn't Iron Man, Spider-Man, Batman, or Superman, any of those names that already come with decades of public recognition. This was a movie with a guy calling himself Star-Lord, a talking raccoon, a walking tree, a green assassin, and a revenge-obsessed warrior who takes everything literally. On paper, that sounds like the kind of thing that could have gone very wrong. So when it didn't go wrong, when people actually enjoyed it, the excitement kind of exploded. Suddenly the conversation became, wait, is this one of Marvel's best movies? Then it became, is this one of the best superhero movies ever? And then, as these things usually go online, the praise started getting a little out of control. That's where I have to pause. Yes, Guardians of the Galaxy is entertaining, very entertaining. Actually, it has personality, it has energy, it has color, it has jokes that land, and it has a cast that clearly understands the rhythm of the movie they're in. But when something gets praised that aggressively, you almost start watching the reputation of the movie rather than the movie itself. And that can be dangerous, because there's a difference between a film being fresh, fun, and surprisingly charming and a film being flawless. Guardians of the Galaxy is not flawless. It is not some untouchable masterpiece where every scene works perfectly, every character is deeply layered, and every story beat feels brand new. It has problems, some small, some more noticeable, but the movie has enough confidence and enough weird charm that a lot of people were willing to forgive those problems. I think that's part of why the hype became so intense. It wasn't just that people liked the movie, it was that they liked being surprised by it. They liked that Marvel took something strange and turned it into something mainstream audiences could actually enjoy. They liked that a film built around characters most casual viewers had never heard of could somehow feel more alive than some of the safer, more familiar superhero films around it. And honestly, that surprise matters. There's a certain kind of joy that comes from going into a movie with doubts and leaving with a smile. That doesn't automatically make it one of the greatest films ever made, but it does make the experience memorable, and Guardians of the Galaxy definitely had that effect on people. So when I look at the massive praise, I understand where it came from. I understand why audiences embraced it so quickly. I understand why fans wanted to push it higher and higher, almost as if they were rewarding the movie for being different. But at the same time, I don't think you need to exaggerate what it is in order to appreciate it. For me, Guardians of the Galaxy works best when you meet it on its own terms, not as the greatest superhero film ever made, not as a perfect sci-fi epic, not as some sacred entry in blockbuster history, but as a loud, colorful, oddly sincere space adventure that had no business working as well as it did. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the real achievement isn't that it lived up to every bit of hype surrounding it. Maybe the achievement is that underneath all that hype, there was still a genuinely fun movie sitting there. By the time Guardians of the Galaxy came around, superhero movies were already everywhere. Every summer had another origin story, another city getting smashed, another villain standing in the sky threatening the entire planet, another post-credits tease reminding you that this was not really the end, just a doorway into the next thing. And to be fair, a lot of those movies were fun, some were genuinely great, but after a while, even good superhero movies can start to feel like they're running on the same track. You know the rhythm. A hero discovers who they are, a villain wants power, the world is in danger, the final act becomes a giant effects-heavy battle, the hero wins, the franchise continues, and everyone goes home more or less satisfied. So when people talk about comic book movie fatigue, I understand it. It's not always that audiences are tired of superheroes themselves. Sometimes they're tired of the shape of the story and the predictability, the seriousness, the feeling that every movie is trying to convince you that what you're watching is extremely important, even when it's basically just another round of people in costumes throwing each other through buildings. And then Guardians of the Galaxy shows up. The funny thing is, this movie technically belongs to the same machine. It is still Marvel. It is still built for a big audience. It still has huge action scenes, expensive CGI, a dangerous object everyone wants, and a villain threatening massive destruction. On paper, it has plenty of the same ingredients, but the flavor is different. That's really what made it stand out. It didn't walk into the room acting like the next sacred chapter of superhero cinema. It came in dancing to old music, making weird jokes, throwing together criminals and weirdos, and asking you to care about a raccoon with anger issues and a tree that only says one sentence. There's something refreshing about that. Instead of another polished hero trying to carry the weight of destiny, the movie gives us people who barely qualify as heroes at all. They're selfish, they're immature, they're damaged. Some of them are criminals. Some of them don't even like each other. Most of them would probably run from responsibility if there was money on the other side of the room. And because of that, the movie feels loose and has this slightly scrappy energy, like it knows how ridiculous it is and decides to enjoy that instead of hiding from it. That matters because a lot of superhero movies around that time were either becoming extremely serious or extremely formulaic. Guardians doesn't escape the formula completely, but it does enough weird little things around the edges that you don't always feel the machinery working underneath. The humor helps a lot. The music helps too. The fact that most of it takes place away from Earth gives it room to breathe. You're not watching another familiar city get destroyed. You're bouncing through strange planets, prisons, ships, markets, alien cultures, and places that feel like they came from a completely different corner of the Marvel universe. That distance from the usual superhero setting gives the movie a kind of freedom. It doesn't have to behave like Iron Man. It doesn't have to carry itself like Captain America. It doesn't have the mythological weight of Thor. It can be messier, louder, sillier, and more chaotic. And somehow that chaos becomes part of the charm. Now, does that mean it completely solves superhero fatigue? No. Not really. There are still familiar pieces here. The villain still wants a powerful object. The final act still turns into a massive battle. The story still has the shape of a blockbuster designed to launch more blockbusters. So it's not like the film is some total rebellion against the genre. But it does remind you that these movies can still surprise you when they stop taking themselves so seriously. That, to me, is why Guardians of the Galaxy felt refreshing, not because it threw away the superhero formula entirely, but because it found a stranger, funnier, more colorful way to move through it. It arrived at a time when the genre was starting to feel crowded, and instead of adding more weight to that crowd, it brought a little looseness back, a little mischief, a little stupidity in the best possible way, and sometimes that's exactly what a tired genre needs. The strange thing about Guardians of the Galaxy is that looking back now, it almost feels obvious that it worked, but at the time, it really wasn't obvious at all. This was not Marvel putting one of their safest names on the screen. This wasn't a movie built around a character everybody already knew from lunchboxes, cartoons, Halloween costumes, and decades of pop culture. For a lot of casual viewers, the reaction was probably something like, "Who are these people?" And honestly, that question is part of what made the whole thing interesting, because Guardians of the Galaxy was built around a group that sounded, at least from the outside, almost impossible to sell with a straight face. A thief who insists people call him Star-Lord, a green assassin with a complicated past, a huge warrior who takes everything literally, a walking tree, a raccoon with guns. That is a weird lineup, not charming weird in the safe marketing sense, but actually weird. The kind of weird where if the tone is even slightly off, the whole movie could collapse into something embarrassing. A talking raccoon is funny until the movie asks you to care about him. A tree who says basically one sentence is cute until the film needs him to become emotionally memorable. A team of criminals can be fun until you realize none of them are naturally heroic enough to carry a big summer movie. So this was a gamble. Marvel had already built a lot of trust by this point, and audiences were willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. But trust only gets you so far. At some point, the movie still has to make people believe in what they're watching. It has to take these characters who most viewers don't know, place them in a galaxy full of unfamiliar names, politics, and planets, and somehow make the whole thing feel accessible instead of exhausting. That's not easy, and you can feel the film working hard to make it happen. It doesn't begin by demanding that you understand every corner of its mythology. It begins with emotion, then throws you into adventure, then lets the characters slowly explain the world through conflict, jokes, arguments, and bad decisions. Instead of stopping every few minutes to tell you why this universe matters, it lets you hang around these strange people long enough that you start to enjoy their company. That's where the risk starts paying off. The movie understands that the audience might not immediately care about Xander, the Kree, the Nova Corps, or the larger cosmic structure, but they might care about Peter trying to act cooler than he is. They might care about Rocket being angry at the world. They might care about Groot quietly standing beside him. They might laugh at Drax misunderstanding a metaphor. They might get pulled in by Gamora trying to escape the life she came from. And once you care about the group, the galaxy becomes easier to accept. That's probably the smartest thing the film does. It doesn't sell these unknown characters by pretending they were famous all along. It sells them by leaning into the fact that they are odd, messy, and not exactly the heroic ideal. They are not polished icons. They are not noble legends. They are people, people, aliens, a tree, and a raccoon who stumble into importance almost by accident. There's a looseness to that which makes the movie feel less calculated than it probably was. Of course, it is still a major studio blockbuster designed to launch a franchise, but the central idea feels risky enough that the movie earns some goodwill just by making it function. Because this could have been a disaster. It could have been too silly, too confusing, or felt like Marvel scraping the bottom of the comic book barrel and hoping the brand name would do all the work. Instead, it became one of those rare cases where unfamiliarity actually helped. Since most viewers had no fixed idea of what Guardians of the Galaxy was supposed to be, the film had room to define itself. And it defined itself loudly with music, color, sarcasm, strange creatures, space battles, and a group of characters who somehow became more appealing because they weren't the obvious choice. That, to me, is why the risk matters. Guardians of the Galaxy wasn't just another superhero film using a familiar name to guarantee attention. It had to earn that attention from scratch. And even if the movie has flaws, even if the story is familiar in places, there is something genuinely impressive about watching a blockbuster take characters this strange and turn them into a team people actually wanted to follow. What makes Guardians of the Galaxy interesting is that it is technically a superhero movie, but it rarely feels like one in the usual sense. There is no masked hero protecting a city, no billionaire building armor in a workshop, no ordinary guy waking up with powers, no noble figure standing around talking about responsibility every 5 minutes. The movie belongs to Marvel, yes, but it doesn't move with the same rhythm as the more familiar Marvel stories. It feels more like somebody took a superhero film, threw it into deep space, shook it around with a bunch of old pop songs, and then replaced the traditional hero team with a group of criminals who can barely stand each other. And honestly, that is a big reason why it works. The film never asks these characters to look clean or heroic right away. Peter Quill is not some grand chosen one. He is a thief with too much confidence and not enough self-awareness. Rocket and Groot are bounty hunters. Gamora has been working with dangerous people. Drax is driven almost completely by revenge. These are not the kind of characters who walk into the story already prepared to save the universe. They kind of trip into it. That gives the movie a different flavor. The heroism doesn't feel polished. It feels accidental at first, almost inconvenient. These characters are not sitting around waiting for a noble mission. Most of them are chasing money, survival, revenge, or escape. Saving the galaxy is not exactly their first instinct, and that makes them fun to watch, because instead of a team of perfect heroes learning to cooperate, we get a group of damaged, selfish, sarcastic outsiders slowly realizing they might actually need one another. The movie has action, yes, it has the big villain, the powerful object, the universe-threatening danger. All the blockbuster ingredients are there. But the personality of the film comes from the fact that the so-called heroes are constantly undercutting the seriousness of the situation. They argue, they insult each other, they make bad choices, they misunderstand things, they walk into danger with half a plan and way too much attitude. That is not always what we expect from superhero cinema, especially the kind built for massive audiences. Usually, these movies want their heroes to feel iconic. Guardians seems more interested in making them feel strange, funny, and a little broken. And because almost the entire movie takes place away from Earth, it has even more freedom to be weird. The film is not tied down by familiar streets, recognizable cities, or the usual save-the-world imagery. Instead, we get prisons in space, alien markets, strange planets, colorful civilizations, talking creatures, floating cities, and cosmic politics that sound ridiculous until the movie just keeps moving fast enough that you go along with it. That is part of the trick. The film knows that if it slows down too much, some of this might start to look silly. So it keeps the energy moving. It uses humor to soften the stranger ideas. It uses the characters to guide us through the mythology. And it uses the soundtrack almost like a reminder that no matter how bizarre the galaxy gets, there is still a very human feeling sitting underneath it all. That is why Guardians of the Galaxy does not feel like just another superhero entry. It is still part of the Marvel machine. You can feel the franchise pieces clicking into place, but the surface is so odd, so colorful, and so loose that it feels like it slipped through a different door. It is more space comedy than traditional superhero drama, more misfit adventure than clean origin story, more about personality than mythology. And that difference matters, because at a time when superhero films were starting to feel increasingly familiar, Guardians found a way to make the genre feel less stiff. It did not reinvent everything, let's not go that far, but it did remind audiences that a comic book movie could be messy, goofy, and strange, and still have enough heart to pull people in. Once Guardians of the Galaxy leaves Earth, it really leaves Earth, and that is where the movie starts to become its own thing. This is not a superhero story where space is just a quick detour or a glowing backdrop for one scene. The galaxy is basically the whole playground here. Strange planets, prison ships, alien cities, bounty hunters, cosmic warlords, glowing artifacts, weird creatures, space battles, and the movie throws you into that world almost immediately and expects you to keep up, and weirdly, that works. There is a very clear space opera feeling running through the whole film. You can feel it pulling from the tradition of big, colorful sci-fi adventure stories and the kind where the universe is huge, dangerous, ridiculous, and somehow still fun to explore. It has that old-school adventure quality where every location feels like it might have its own criminals, rules, monsters, and bad decisions waiting around the corner. Some parts obviously bring Star Wars to mind, and not in a subtle way. You have the roguish lead, the strange alien companions, the galactic politics, the villain with massive destructive ambitions, and that constant feeling that the heroes are flying from one problem straight into another. But the film is not just trying to become Star Wars. It has a rougher, louder, more sarcastic personality, a less mythic, more chaotic. There is also that Indiana Jones in space feeling people talk about with this movie. Peter Quill is basically introduced as a treasure hunter, sneaking into dangerous places, stealing valuable objects, and acting like he is much smoother than he actually is. The orb itself is treated like one of those classic adventure movie artifacts. Everybody wants it, nobody fully understands it at first, and the deeper the story goes, the more dangerous it becomes. That adventure tone gives the film a lot of momentum. Instead of building everything around one city or one superhero origin, the movie keeps jumping from place to place. Morag, Xander, the kiln, Nair, the ships, the final battle. Each stop adds another layer to the universe. Some of it is explained, some of it is just thrown at you visually, and you absorb it as you go. That can be overwhelming. There are moments where the film's mythology feels like it is moving faster than the audience can process. Names, races, alliances, grudges, planets, cosmic objects. It is a lot, especially if you came in knowing nothing about these characters. But the movie usually gets away with it because the tone stays light. It does not force you to memorize every political detail of the galaxy. It gives you just enough to understand the danger, then moves back to the characters. And that is probably the right call, because the fun of this movie is not really in understanding every corner of the galaxy. It is in the feeling of being dropped into a universe that seems bigger than the story we are watching. There are places here that feel lived in even when we only see them for a short time. There are creatures in the background that look like they wandered in from 5 different movies. There are costumes, ships, weapons, and alien designs that make the whole thing feel loud and crowded in a good way. It is messy, but it is not empty. That is important. A lot of effects-heavy sci-fi can feel like digital wallpaper, big, expensive, and somehow lifeless. Guardians avoids that most of the time because its world has personality. It is colorful, strange, and a little dirty around the edges. The galaxy does not feel clean or noble. It feels like a place full of smugglers, prisoners, soldiers, collectors, mercenaries, and people constantly trying to sell or steal something. That gives the movie a nice texture. And because the story is so rooted in adventure, the film has room to be playful. It can have a massive space battle one minute and a ridiculous argument the next. It can introduce dangerous cosmic mythology and then undercut it with a joke. It can look expensive without always acting overly serious. That balance is what makes the space opera side of Guardians of the Galaxy enjoyable. It takes familiar sci-fi ingredients as the artifact, the outlaw hero, the alien team, the evil warlord, the galactic threat, and filters them through a more comic, music-driven, slightly anarchic style. It is not the most original story underneath. You can see plenty of familiar bones, but the atmosphere around those bones is energetic enough that the movie still feels alive. And in a blockbuster landscape full of earthbound superhero stories, that cosmic adventure tone gives Guardians a real sense of escape. Not just the world is in danger escape, but actual escape, the kind where you feel like you have been pulled out of the usual movie universe and dropped somewhere louder, stranger, and a lot less predictable. The actual story of Guardians of the Galaxy is pretty simple when you strip it down. A kid from Earth loses his mother, gets abducted by aliens, grows up out in space, becomes a thief, steals the wrong object, and suddenly half the galaxy wants his head. That is basically the engine. and the movie is smart enough not to pretend the plot is more complicated than it is. It has a lot of names, a lot of planets, a lot of alien politics, and a lot of Marvel cosmic mythology floating around. But underneath all of that, this is really a chase movie. Peter Quill gets his hands on the orb, and from that moment on, the story becomes one long chain reaction. Everybody wants this thing. Quill wants to sell it. Yondu wants it because Quill double-crossed him. Gamora is sent after it because Ronan wants it. Rocket and Groot see Quill as a bounty. Ronan wants the orb because of the power inside it. And before long, what starts as one guy trying to make some money turns into a much bigger problem than he ever expected. That setup works because Peter does not begin the movie as someone trying to save anyone. He is not chasing destiny. He is not answering some noble call. He is just trying to steal something valuable and walk away richer. There is something very clean about that and kind of funny too, because the entire fate of the galaxy starts with a guy who thinks he is cooler than he is, dancing around an abandoned planet looking for treasure. That is a very specific opening for a Marvel hero. And from there the movie keeps pulling more characters into the mess. Gamora enters with her own agenda. Rocket and Groot are not noble protectors either. They are just trying to collect the reward. Drax joins because his hatred for Ronan gives him a reason to fight. Nobody is really there for the right reason at first. That is what makes the team formation feel entertaining. They are not drawn together by honor. They are drawn together by greed, revenge, survival, betrayal, and extremely bad timing. They meet because everything goes wrong. They end up in prison because everyone is chasing everyone else. And somehow inside that chaos, the movie starts building the group. The Kiln prison section is important for that reason. It is not just a place where the plot pauses before the next action scene. It is where these characters are forced into the same space long enough to understand how strange they are together. Quill is trying to talk his way through danger. Rocket is already planning an escape. Groot is doing Groot things. Gamora is hated by prisoners because of her connection to Ronan and Thanos. Drax sees her as a path to revenge. None of these people should become friends, and at first they don't. They barely trust each other. They make deals because it is useful. They cooperate because they need something. There is always this feeling that if the situation changed slightly, at least one of them would probably betray the rest without thinking too hard about it. But that is also what keeps the story moving. The movie is not built around a clean heroic mission from the beginning. It is built around unstable people being pushed into bigger and bigger situations until eventually they have to choose whether they are only looking out for themselves or whether they are willing to become something more. The orb is the thing that forces that choice. At first, it is just a valuable object. Then it becomes clear that it holds a level of destructive power nobody should be playing with. Once that happens, the movie shifts. The characters can no longer treat it like a payday. Ronan is not just another buyer. Xander is not just another planet in the background. The threat becomes real enough that even this group of criminals has to recognize the danger. Now, is the orb plot itself especially original? Not really. It is the classic powerful object story. Everybody is chasing the same thing. The villain wants to use it for destruction, and the heroes have to stop him before the final act turns into full-scale disaster. We have seen that shape before, many times. But Guardians of the Galaxy gets away with it because the plot is not really the reason people remember the movie. The story is the track. The characters are the ride. What matters is not simply that Peter steals the orb. What matters is how that theft drags together a group of people who should never function as a team. What matters is the way the chase keeps throwing them into situations where their personalities clash, reveal themselves, and slowly begin to connect. So yes, the setup is familiar. A stolen object, a dangerous villain, a group of unlikely allies, a galaxy at risk. But the movie understands that familiar does not automatically mean boring. If the rhythm is strong, if the characters have chemistry, and if the world is colorful enough, a simple story can still carry a lot of entertainment. And that is exactly what happens here. The plot may not be the freshest part of Guardians of the Galaxy, but it gives the movie a clear reason to keep moving. It gets Peter out into the galaxy. It brings Gamora, Rocket, Groot, and Drax into the same orbit. It gives Ronan a target. And most importantly, It creates enough pressure for 5 selfish outsiders to slowly stumble their way toward becoming heroes, not gracefully, not cleanly, but in a way that feels very much like them. One of the smartest choices in Guardians of the Galaxy is that no matter how strange the universe gets, the movie gives us Peter Quill as the human doorway into it. Because this galaxy is a lot. There are blue people, green people, tree people, and one raccoon person, prison colonies, ancient grudges, alien empires, bounty hunters, ravagers, Kree fanatics, Nova officers, a weird collector, and names that sound like they were pulled from 3 different sci-fi books at once. For a viewer coming in with no comic book background, that could easily become exhausting. But then you have Quill. And Quill is important because he does not feel like he belongs there either. Not completely. He has lived in space for most of his life, sure, but he still carries Earth with him in a way the other characters don't. He has the music, he has the Walkman, he has these half-remembered pop culture references that nobody around him really understands. He talks about things like Footloose and Kevin Bacon as if they are universal knowledge, even though he is usually speaking to people who have absolutely no reason to know what he means. That makes him funny, but it also makes him useful. He is the audience's foothold. When the movie starts throwing all this cosmic mythology at us, Quill keeps the tone grounded, not grounded in a realistic way, because nothing about this movie is realistic, but grounded emotionally. He reacts to things with sarcasm, panic, ego, confusion, and sometimes complete immaturity. He is not standing there like a grand sci-fi warrior who fully understands the history of every planet. A lot of the time he is just trying to stay alive, talk his way out of trouble, or pretend he has more control than he does. That is very human, and it helps the movie avoid feeling too distant. Because the world of Guardians is so alien, it needs someone who can make the strangeness feel approachable. Peter does that without making the film slow down every 5 minutes to explain itself. He gives us a familiar rhythm inside an unfamiliar place. His connection to Earth also gives the movie a surprising emotional thread. The Walkman is not just a cute gimmick. The songs are not just there because the soundtrack is fun. They are pieces of the life he lost. They connect him to his mother, to his childhood, to a version of himself that was taken away before he had any say in it. So even when he is dancing through ruins or acting like a space outlaw, there is still this little piece of sadness underneath him. That is why Quill works better than he maybe should. On the surface, he is goofy. He flirts badly, makes jokes at the wrong time, gives himself a nickname nobody respects, and tries very hard to seem legendary. But under that, he is still the kid from Earth who never really got to grow up normally. He is surrounded by aliens, but emotionally, he is still carrying the moment that began the whole story. The movie does not lean into that too heavily, and honestly, it probably shouldn't. Too much seriousness would damage the rhythm, but it gives just enough to keep Quill from being only a punchline. He becomes the bridge between two tones. On one side, you have the absurd cosmic adventure, glowing stones, space battles, dangerous warlords, talking trees. On the other side, you have a man holding on to a mixtape because it is one of the last things connecting him to someone he loved. That contrast gives the movie a lot of its personality. Without Quill, the galaxy might feel too weird too fast. With him, it feels weird in a way we can enjoy. He does not explain the universe perfectly, he does not always understand it himself, but he gives us a familiar emotional center while everything around him gets louder, stranger, and more colorful. And that is why Peter Quill matters so much to the structure of the film. He is not just the lead because the story starts with him. He is the lead because he lets the audience enter this ridiculous galaxy without feeling completely lost. He is the human piece in a movie that keeps proudly surrounding him with things that are not human at all. A thief in space, a kid with a Walkman, a guy trying to act like a legend while quietly holding on to home. Peter Quill is not introduced like the usual superhero lead, and that is one of the first things that makes him stand out. He is not rich, he is not noble, he is not some tortured genius building technology in a cave. He is not a chosen warrior with a grand destiny hanging over him. He is not even especially respected in the world he lives in. In his own mind, maybe he is a legendary outlaw. To almost everyone else, He is just this annoying guy who calls himself Star-Lord and keeps waiting for the name to impress people, which most of the time it does not. That is funny, but it also tells you a lot about the character. Quill wants to seem cooler than he actually is. He walks into scenes with this overconfident swagger, like he has already imagined how impressive he looks from the outside. But the movie keeps undercutting him. He gets chased, he gets insulted, people forget his name, his plans fall apart, his reputation is clearly not as big as he thinks it is, and because of that, he feels oddly human. A more traditional version of this character might have been played as a clean action hero, a smooth, confident, dangerous, always one step ahead. But Chris Pratt plays Quill with this slightly clumsy charm. He can be brave, sure, but he is also goofy. He can be clever, but not always smart. He can talk his way into a situation and then immediately make it worse because he will not stop talking. That balance is important, because if Quill were only a joke, the movie would not work. And if he were only cool, the movie would lose a lot of its personality. The fun is that he is somewhere in the middle, just enough ability to survive, but not enough dignity to become boring. He is reckless in a way that feels almost casual. He steals the orb without fully understanding what he has taken. He double-crosses people who are obviously dangerous. He flirts when he should probably be running. He tries to negotiate with people who would happily kill him. And yet somehow he keeps moving forward with this weird optimism. Like every disaster is just another part of the adventure. There is something likable about that. Not because he is perfect, he is not. He is arrogant, immature, and often ridiculous. But he is also sincere in small ways. Under all the jokes and the fake legend he has built around himself, there is a guy who wants to matter. He wants the name Star-Lord to mean something. He wants people to look at him and see more than a thief with a mixtape. And the movie lets that insecurity sit there without making it too heavy. That is where Chris Pratt's performance does a lot of the work. He brings a loose, easy comic energy to the role. But he does not play Quill like someone who knows he is in a comedy at all times. Quill takes himself seriously, and that is part of why he is funny. He thinks the entrance is cool. He thinks the nickname works. He thinks the speech is landing. And half the time, everyone around him is just staring like, what is wrong with this guy? That contrast gives the character his rhythm. He is not the strongest member of the group, nor the smartest, nor the most dangerous in a fight. Gamora is probably more skilled, Rocket is more technically useful, Groot has more raw power, Drax is physically stronger. Quill's real strength is that he is adaptable. He is the one who keeps trying to connect even when the group is falling apart. Sometimes through jokes, sometimes through bad plans, sometimes through pure desperation, and that makes him a different kind of lead. He is not leading because everyone naturally respects him. They don't. He is not leading because he has earned some sacred title. He hasn't. He becomes the center because he is the one character who can move between the others. He can irritate Rocket, challenge Gamora, confuse Drax, talk to Groot, and still somehow keep the whole mess from completely breaking apart. That is a very strange leadership style, but for this movie, it fits. Because Guardians of the Galaxy is not about polished heroes standing in perfect formation. It is about damaged people slowly figuring out how to care about something bigger than themselves. Quill works as the lead because he is messy enough to belong with them, but open enough to pull them towards something better. He is the guy who begins the movie trying to sell an orb and ends up helping save a planet. And somehow the movie makes that transition feel believable, not because he suddenly becomes noble overnight, but because the ridiculous, insecure, music-loving thief we met at the beginning had a little more heart than he wanted people to notice. There is definitely a bit of Han Solo energy in Peter Quill, not in the sense that he is a direct copy, but the comparison is hard to avoid. He is a thief, a smuggler type, a guy drifting through space with too much confidence and a habit of getting himself into trouble. He wants to come across like the coolest man in the room, even when the room is full of people who either do not know who he is or do not care. And that is where the movie has some fun with him, because Quill clearly thinks he has the legendary outlaw thing figured out. He has the jacket, the ship, the nickname, the music, the relaxed posture, the whole act. In his head, He probably imagines people whispering Star-Lord with respect wherever he goes. But then he says the name out loud and nobody reacts the way he wants. That little gap between how Quill sees himself and how the galaxy sees him is one of the funniest things about the character. He is not quite the mythic space rogue he wants to be. He is more like someone pretending to be one until the role starts becoming real by accident, and that is a useful distinction. A lot of space adventure heroes are written as naturally cool. They walk into danger with effortless charm. Quill is trying very hard to look effortless. You can feel the performance inside the performance. He is always selling an image of himself, and the movie keeps reminding us that the image is cracked. He is charming, yes, but he is also kind of embarrassing. He dances alone on a dead planet. He flirts at the wrong time. He tries to talk his way out of situations where talking is probably making things worse. He steals from dangerous people and then seems genuinely annoyed when those dangerous people want revenge. He has the attitude of a legendary outlaw but the actual life of a man constantly running from consequences. That makes him more interesting than if he were simply cool, because the film does not fully buy into his fantasy of himself. It lets him have moments where he looks sharp and capable, but it also lets him look foolish. And honestly, that is where Chris Pratt fits the role so well. He understands that Quill's confidence is part charm, part defense mechanism, and part complete nonsense. There is also something very old-school adventure about the way the story uses him. At the start, he is not trying to save the galaxy, he is chasing treasure. The orb is basically his lost artifact. He finds it, steals it, tries to sell it, and only later realizes that this little payday is attached to something much bigger and much more dangerous. That is classic rogue adventure storytelling. The selfish treasure hunter accidentally walking into a moral crisis. And for a while, Quill treats everything like it is still just another job. That is what makes the shift matter. He begins as someone who sees the galaxy in terms of escape routes, deals, money, and reputation. But the story slowly forces him to understand that this time he cannot just run, joke, or bargain his way out. The orb is not just merchandise. Ronan is not just another angry buyer. And the people around him are not just temporary partners he can use and leave behind. So the rogue has to grow up a little. Not completely, that would be boring, and it would not feel like Quill. He is still sarcastic, still immature, still weirdly impressed with himself. But by the end, the movie lets him become something slightly more than the act he has been performing. That is why the Han Solo comparison works, but only up to a point. Quill has the shape of that character type, the charming thief, the reluctant hero, the guy who would rather pretend he does not care until caring becomes impossible. But he is goofier, less smooth, and more openly damaged. He is not just the cool scoundrel in space. He is a kid who was taken from Earth, grew up around criminals, built a fake legend around himself, and now has to decide whether there is anything real underneath it. And the answer, surprisingly, is yes. It is buried under bad jokes, fake swagger, and a lot of dancing, but it is there. That is what makes Quill more than a reference point to better-known space rogues. He starts as a man pretending to be legendary, and the movie's real joke is that somehow, through all the chaos, he might actually earn the name. The real reason Guardians of the Galaxy works is not the orb, it is not Ronan, it is not even the space battles, as fun as some of them are. It is the group, because once Peter Quill, Gamora, Rocket, Groot, and Drax are all thrown together, the movie finally finds the thing that makes it feel alive. These characters do not fit together in any clean, heroic, inspiring way at first. They are not a team because they share values. They are not united by some noble mission. At the beginning, most of them are honestly just trying to get something for themselves. Quill wants money and survival. Gamora wants to escape the side she has been forced to stand on. Rocket and Groot want the bounty. Drax wants revenge. Nobody is entering this situation with pure intentions, and that is exactly why the dynamic is fun. They are not heroes pretending to be outsiders. They are outsiders who accidentally move toward heroism, and that difference matters. The movie gets a lot of comedy out of the fact that these people should not be able to function together for more than 5 minutes. Quill keeps trying to talk like he is in charge, Even though nobody has agreed to that, Gamora is constantly irritated by how unserious everyone around her is. Rocket is angry, sarcastic, and always about 2 seconds away from insulting someone. Groot is loyal but strange, operating on his own little emotional frequency. Drax takes everything literally and turns basic conversation into a problem. Put them in the same room and naturally the room becomes chaos, but it is entertaining chaos. The group argues, threatens, mocks, misunderstands, and second-guesses each other, but the scenes rarely feel dead because every character brings a different kind of energy. No one is doing the exact same job. Quill is the loose, arrogant human center. Gamora brings discipline and seriousness. Rocket brings attitude and technical intelligence. Groot brings warmth. Drax brings brute force and accidental comedy. On their own, some of them might not carry a whole movie. Together, they start to click, and the movie understands that the chemistry should not appear too quickly. At first, their cooperation is purely practical. They need each other because the situation forces them together. Escaping prison, selling the orb, surviving Ronan's pursuit. These are not friendship activities. These are desperate survival moves. But slowly, something changes. You begin to feel that their constant arguing is becoming a kind of bond. Not a soft, sentimental bond at first, more like the bond of people who have been through too much nonsense together to pretend they are complete strangers anymore. They still insult each other, still make bad decisions, still clash constantly. But there is a growing sense that they understand each other's damage. That is what gives the team more texture than expected. They are all broken in different ways. Quill is hiding grief behind swagger. Gamora is trying to separate herself from a violent past. Rocket is angry because he has been treated like an experiment instead of a person. Groot communicates simply, but he seems to understand loyalty better than almost anyone else. Drax has turned his loss into a weapon and does not know what to do with himself beyond revenge. The movie does not stop to turn every one of those wounds into a dramatic speech, and honestly, that is a good thing. It lets most of it come through behavior, through jokes, through reactions, through the way these characters slowly stop seeing each other as tools and start seeing each other as people worth protecting. That is when the team dynamic starts to matter emotionally, because by the time they decide to stand together, it does not feel like a clean superhero formation. It feels like a bunch of damaged weirdos making a choice they are not fully prepared for, but making it anyway. They are still messy, still sarcastic, still not exactly noble in the traditional sense, but they show up. And that is the charm of this group. The Guardians are not appealing because they are the strongest or the most disciplined or the most morally pure. They are appealing because they are a disaster that somehow becomes dependable. They are the kind of team where half the members might ruin the plan, but they will probably risk their lives for each other while doing it. That gives the film its personality. The plot may be familiar. The villain may not be the strongest. The cosmic mythology may get a little heavy in places. But whenever the movie returns to these 5 characters bouncing off each other, it regains its spark. Because the heart of Guardians of the Galaxy is not really about saving the galaxy. It is about 5 people who have no business becoming a family, slowly realizing they might be the only family they have. What gives Guardians of the Galaxy more staying power than you might expect is the way it slowly turns chaos into companionship. Because on the surface, this is a loud movie, jokes, fights, spaceships, prison breaks, glowing stones, alien armies, and all the usual blockbuster noise. But underneath that, the emotional idea is actually very simple. These are people who do not really belong anywhere, and by the end, they start belonging to each other. That is the part that sneaks up on you. At first, none of them look like they need family, or at least they would never admit that they do. Quill hides behind charm and music. Gamora hides behind discipline and distance. Rocket hides behind anger. Drax hides behind revenge. Groot, in his own quiet way, is maybe the only one who already understands loyalty without needing to explain it. They all have their own damage, and the film does not always sit down and spell all of that out in some big emotional monologue. It is not that kind of movie. Most of the time it is too busy moving, joking, or blowing something up, but you can still feel the loneliness in the group. Each character has been separated from something: a home, a family, a past, a sense of identity, a normal life. Quill was taken from Earth as a child. Gamora is trying to break away from the people who shaped her into a weapon. Rocket carries the bitterness of being treated like an experiment. Drax has lost his wife and daughter, and that loss has swallowed almost everything else about him. Groot does not say much, but his bond with Rocket already feels like proof that he understands attachment better than most. So when these characters come together, it is not just funny because they clash, it is meaningful because they recognize something in each other, even if they would never say it out loud. They are all misfits, but not in a cute, polished way. They are difficult, defensive, strange, violent, and immature. Some of them are deeply annoying. Some of them are carrying grief so awkwardly that it comes out as arrogance, rage, or sarcasm. And that makes the found family angle work better, because the movie does not make them instantly lovable saints. They become family while still being kind of terrible at it. That feels right for this group. Their version of affection is not gentle at first. It is insults, arguments, bad plans, and saving each other while pretending it is not personal, standing beside someone because technically the mission requires it, until slowly it becomes obvious that the mission is not the only reason anymore. That slow shift is where the heart of the movie lives. By the time they start choosing each other, you understand why it matters. These are characters who have spent most of their lives being used, hunted, abandoned, or defined by someone else's violence. So when they decide even clumsily to protect one another, it feels like a real step forward. Not a perfect healing moment, just a step, and that is enough. The movie never turns into a heavy drama about trauma, and it probably would have collapsed if it tried, but it gives the characters just enough emotional weight to make the team feel like more than a joke machine. Their friendship has an edge to it, messy, sarcastic, sometimes ridiculous, but it is also sincere in the places where it counts. That is why the final idea of them becoming the Guardians actually lands, because they do not start as guardians of anything. They start as thieves, assassins, bounty hunters, survivors, and revenge seekers. They start as people who would probably sell each other out if the price was good enough. But somewhere along the way, they become responsible for each other. And once that happens, saving the galaxy does not feel like some abstract heroic duty. It feels like protecting the first place where they have ever really belonged. That is a big difference. The movie's emotional core is not that these people suddenly become noble because the plot requires it. It is that they find in each other the kind of support and companionship they were missing. They are still flawed, still loud, still reckless, still emotionally unstable in several different directions, but they are no longer alone. And for a movie this colorful and ridiculous, that little bit of sincerity goes a long way. One thing Guardians of the Galaxy does better than it probably gets credit for is balancing this many loud characters without letting the whole thing collapse into noise. Because this could have easily become the Peter Quill show. He is the human character. He is the one we meet first. He has the emotional opening, the connection to Earth, the Walkman, the soundtrack, the whole Star-Lord identity. The story naturally bends around him, so it would have been very easy for everyone else to feel like decoration around his arc. But the movie mostly avoids that. Quill is still the center as the film never really pretends otherwise, but it gives the others enough space to make the team feel like a real ensemble instead of one lead character and four colorful sidekicks. Gamora gets her own tension, especially because she is not just the love interest or the tough woman in the group. She enters the story with baggage, history, and dangerous connections, and with her own decision to turn away from the side she came from. She has a seriousness that cuts through Quill's nonsense, and that contrast helps both characters. Rocket, meanwhile, could have been nothing more than the joke character, a talking raccoon with guns. That alone could carry a few laughs, maybe sell some toys, and then fade into the background. But the movie gives him attitude, pain, intelligence, and a strange kind of wounded pride. He feels like someone constantly trying to prove he is not just a thing people can laugh at. That gives him weight. Groot is even trickier, because he barely says anything. On paper, he should be impossible to develop in the same way as the others, but the film uses his behavior instead of his words as gentleness, his loyalty to Rocket, his physical strength, his small moments of kindness. All of that makes him feel present even when he is not verbally driving a scene. And then there is Drax. He could have been just the muscle at a big guy, the revenge machine, the character who punches things and delivers intense lines. And yes, he is that in some ways. But the movie finds comedy in him without completely removing the sadness behind him. His literal way of speaking becomes funny, but his grief is still there. It does not get explored as deeply as it maybe could have been, but it gives him more shape than just strong angry man. That is what makes the group dynamic work. Each character has a different texture. Quill brings ego and insecurity. Gamora brings focus and conflict. Rocket brings sarcasm and damage. Groot brings warmth. Drax brings bluntness, grief, and accidental comedy. So when they are all together, the scenes have movement. The humor does not come from one person doing all the work, it comes from the way their personalities crash into each other. And the film seems aware of that. It keeps giving them small moments to stand out. A look, a line, a reaction, a piece of action, a misunderstanding, a gesture. Not every character gets equal depth, and the movie definitely favors some over others, but most of them get enough identity that you remember them as individuals. That matters in a team movie, because if the ensemble is weak, the whole emotional structure falls apart. We have to believe that these people are different enough to clash but connected enough to eventually stand together. If they all sound the same, the banter dies. If one character dominates too much, the found family idea feels fake. If the quieter characters disappear, the team stops feeling complete. Guardians walks that line surprisingly well. It is not perfect as some backstories are thin, some emotional turns happen faster than they probably should, and you can feel moments where the movie chooses speed over depth. But for a film introducing an entire cosmic team to viewers who may know nothing about them, it gives each Guardian a clear reason to be there. That is a real achievement. By the end, you do not just remember the concept of the group. You remember the shape of each person inside it, as the loud one, the angry one, the quiet one, the dangerous one, the one pretending to be cooler than he is. And somehow, instead of fighting for space in the movie, they create the movie's best energy. That is why the ensemble works. Not because everyone gets the exact same attention, but because everyone gets a personality, a rhythm, and something to add that the others do not have. And in a movie this crowded, that makes all the difference. Gamora is interesting because she enters Guardians of the Galaxy looking like she is going to be one very specific kind of character. At first, she is the deadly one, the serious one, the person who walks into the movie with a mission, a reputation, and a level of control that immediately separates her from someone like Quill, who is basically surviving on charm, luck, and bad timing. Gamora does not have that loose, messy energy. She feels sharper, more focused, more dangerous. And the movie needs that, because without her, the group could easily become too silly too quickly. Quill is joking, Rocket is insulting everyone, Groot is Groot, Drax is unintentionally funny half the time. Gamora brings a different kind of weight. She has the presence of someone who has lived inside the darker side of this universe and knows exactly how ugly it can get. Her connection to Ronan and Thanos gives her a much heavier background than the movie always has time to fully explore. She is not just some random fighter chasing the orb. She has been shaped by powerful, violent people. She has been part of a world where cruelty is normal, loyalty is forced, and survival probably meant becoming useful to monsters. That makes her decision to turn away from that side important. She is not simply switching teams because the plot needs her to. At least, that is not how it feels when the character is working. Gamora comes across as someone trying to take control of her own life after being used by people who saw her as a weapon. Her betrayal of Ronan is not just a tactical move, it is part of her attempt to stop being defined by the people who controlled her. That is why her role in the team matters. She is the one who understands the seriousness of the threat before some of the others do. While Quill is still thinking in terms of profit and survival, and Rocket is thinking in terms of rewards and escape plans, Gamora understands that the orb is not just a valuable object. She knows that the wrong person getting hold of it would be catastrophic. In other words, she is ahead of the moral curve. But what makes her work in the group is that she is not written as some flawless moral center either. She is guarded. She is impatient. She does not immediately trust anyone. And honestly, why would she? She has no reason to believe this group of criminals is capable of anything beyond selfishness. For a while, she looks at them the way a sensible person would, as a disaster waiting to happen. And she is not wrong. That is where her dynamic with Quill becomes useful. He irritates her because he refuses to treat everything with the gravity she thinks it deserves. He flirts, jokes, dances around problems, and acts like confidence can replace discipline. She cuts through that. She challenges him. She keeps the film from letting Quill's personality completely take over. But at the same time, Quill's looseness affects her too, not in a cheap way where she suddenly becomes less serious because the charming guy teaches her how to have fun, but in a simpler way. Being around the group slowly pulls her out of isolation. She begins the movie as someone working alone, protecting herself, trusting almost no one. By the end, she is part of something she did not expect to need. That is the emotional shift. Gamora's arc is not as loud as Rocket's pain or Quill's connection to his mother, and it is not as instantly comedic as Drax or Groot, but it gives the team an important layer. She is the character who has already seen what the villains represent from the inside. Her choice to stand against them makes the Guardians feel less like a random accident and more like a group of people rejecting the systems that damaged them. There is also a nice balance in Zoe Saldaña's performance. She gives Gamora enough toughness to be believable as someone feared in this world, but she does not play her as emotionless. There are little signs of exhaustion, frustration, and restraint. A person who has had to stay sharp for so long that softness almost feels dangerous. That makes her gradual connection with the team more satisfying, because it does not feel easy for her. She has to choose trust, and in a film full of characters who are pretending they do not care, that choice means something. Gamora may not always get the flashiest jokes or the most crowd-pleasing moments, but she gives the Guardians a backbone. She brings urgency to the story, discipline to the group, and a sense that the cosmic threat is personal rather than just plot mechanics. Without her, the team would still be funny, but it would not feel as balanced. She is the reminder that underneath the music, sarcasm, and colorful chaos, this galaxy has done real damage to people. And her place among the Guardians is not just about fighting beside them, it is about deciding that the people who made her into a weapon do not get to decide what she becomes next. Rocket is the character who probably should not have worked. That sounds obvious now because people love him, but just think about the idea on paper for a second. A talking raccoon with a gun, voiced by Bradley Cooper, dropped into the middle of a giant Marvel space adventure. That could have been annoying. It could have been one joke stretched across 2 hours. It could have been the kind of character that exists purely so the movie can sell toys and throw out sarcastic one-liners whenever the energy dips. But Rocket ends up being much more than that. In fact, he might be the character who steals the entire film. Part of it is the attitude. Rocket walks into the movie with this constant irritation, like the entire galaxy has personally offended him and he has been waiting all day for an excuse to snap back. He is loud, sarcastic, aggressive, and weirdly professional all at the same time. He complains, insults people, makes terrible plans sound reasonable, and somehow always seems both completely out of control and weirdly competent. That combination is hilarious because Rocket is not just comic relief, he is useful. He is the one who understands weapons, technology, escapes, and security systems, all the little practical details that the rest of the group either ignores or makes worse. If Quill talks his way into trouble, Rocket is usually the one trying to build, shoot, or steal his way out of it. And he is good at it. That matters because the movie never treats him as just a funny raccoon. The joke is not simply that he is small and angry. The joke is that he is small, angry, brilliant, dangerous, insecure, and absolutely done with everyone around him. He has the energy of someone who knows people underestimate him and has decided to make that everybody else's problem. Bradley Cooper's voice work does a lot here. It is not just a celebrity voice pasted onto an animated character. Rocket has a real rhythm in the way he talks, a rough, sarcastic edge, almost like a tiny space criminal who has been around every bad corner of the galaxy and came back with a worse attitude each time. Cooper gives him speed, bite, and personality. You do not spend the movie thinking about the actor in a recording booth. You just accept Rocket as Rocket. That is harder than it looks, especially because Rocket also has to carry some emotional weight. The film hints at the fact that he is not just some naturally occurring talking animal. He has been altered, experimented on, made into something. And underneath all the jokes, there is a real bitterness there. He does not like being mocked. He does not like being treated like a pet, a freak, or a mistake. That pain gives the comedy an edge. It explains why he is so defensive, why he is always ready to lash out, why he hides behind sarcasm before anyone can get too close. Rocket is funny because he is rude and unpredictable, yes, but he is memorable because you can feel that the anger is coming from somewhere. The movie does not overplay it, which is smart. It gives you just enough to understand him without stopping the whole story for a long tragic explanation. Rocket remains funny. He remains chaotic. He remains the guy who will turn a serious moment into an argument. But after a while you stop laughing at him and start laughing with him, because you understand that his whole personality is basically armor. And then there is his bond with Groot. That relationship is one of the reasons Rocket works so well. Groot is calm where Rocket is explosive. Groot is warm where Rocket is sharp. Groot says almost nothing while Rocket cannot seem to stop talking. They should not make sense as a pair, but somehow they do. Groot gives Rocket a kind of quiet emotional grounding, and Rocket gives Groot a voice in the group even while pretending to be annoyed by him. Their friendship makes Rocket feel less isolated. It also lets the audience see that underneath all the insults, Rocket is capable of loyalty. He may not admit it in some big soft speech, but it is there. He cares. He just hates that he cares. That is very Rocket. And in a movie full of big personalities, that is why he stands out. Quill is charming. Gamora is intense. Drax is funny. Groot is lovable. But Rocket has this unpredictable spark that keeps pulling attention back to him. Every time he is on screen, the movie gets a little sharper, a little messier, a little more alive. He is the kind of character who could have ruined the film if handled badly. Instead, he becomes one of its biggest strengths, a sarcastic, wounded, gun-loving raccoon who somehow ends up being one of the most fully realized characters in the whole movie. And honestly, that might be the clearest example of why Guardians of the Galaxy worked when it had every reason to look ridiculous. Groot is one of those characters who sounds almost impossible to discuss seriously, because the entire joke is that he barely says anything. He is a walking tree. His vocabulary consists of essentially one sentence. And yet somehow, by the end of Guardians of the Galaxy, he becomes one of the easiest characters in the movie to like. That is not as simple as it looks, because a character like Groot could have easily been nothing more than a gimmick. He could have been the cute one, the strange one, the walking visual effect who stands beside Rocket and occasionally does something funny in the background. The movie could have used him like a mascot, but it doesn't quite do that. Instead, Groot becomes this oddly gentle presence inside a very loud group. Everyone else talks too much, argues too much, or carries some kind of emotional weapon. Quill hides behind jokes. Rocket hides behind anger. Gamora hides behind control. Drax hides behind revenge. Groot, meanwhile, just kind of exists with this quiet loyalty that feels surprisingly pure compared to everyone around him. He does not need to explain himself. That is the funny thing. Everyone else is constantly trying to define who they are, defend themselves, prove themselves, or push people away. Groot does almost none of that. He communicates through action, through expression, through the way he stays beside Rocket, through the way he protects the group, through these small moments where his simplicity makes him feel more emotionally honest than characters with 10 times more dialogue. And that is why he works. The limited vocabulary could have been a problem, but the movie turns it into a strength. Every I Am Groot has to rely on timing, context, body language, and Vin Diesel's delivery. It becomes less about the words and more about the feeling behind them. Sometimes it is funny, sometimes confused, sometimes gentle, sometimes almost heroic. You start to understand him even though he keeps technically saying the same thing, and that gives Groot a very different rhythm from everyone else around him. His pairing with Rocket is one of the best choices in the film. Rocket is all sharp edges, sarcastic, impatient, defensive, and loud. Groot is calm, steady, warm, and strangely innocent. They balance each other in a way that feels natural, even though nothing about a raccoon and a tree traveling the galaxy together should feel natural. Groot softens Rocket without making him soft. Rocket gives Groot someone to protect, someone to respond to, someone who understands him better than anyone else does. Their friendship feels lived in before the movie even explains anything. You can tell they have been together long enough to build a language of their own. That matters because Groot is not just lovable because he is cute. He is lovable because he brings a sense of loyalty into a movie full of people who do not trust easily. He is strong, he can fight and be dangerous when the scene calls for it, but his strength does not feel aggressive in the same way Drax's does. Groot's power feels protective. He is not trying to dominate a room. He is usually trying to keep someone safe. And in a film where almost every character is damaged or defensive, that kind of sincerity stands out. There is also something quietly funny about how casually the movie treats him. Nobody stops the story every 5 minutes to explain the rules of this tree man. Groot is just there, growing limbs, lifting people, smiling at the wrong time, misunderstanding danger, or doing something unexpectedly sweet. The film trusts the audience to accept him, and after a while you do. That is part of the charm. He is ridiculous, but the movie never seems embarrassed by him. It lets him be strange. It lets him be simple. It lets him be funny without making him empty. And by the time he becomes emotionally important to the group, it does not feel forced. It feels like the natural result of a character who has been quietly showing love the whole time. That is the surprising thing about Groot. He does not have speeches. He does not have a complicated arc. He does not reveal some long tragic backstory. He is not layered in the obvious way. But he gives the film something it really needs: warmth, pure, uncomplicated warmth. And maybe that is why audiences responded to him so strongly. In a movie full of sarcasm, spectacle, and cosmic chaos, Groot is the one character who reminds you that sometimes the simplest emotional beat is the one that lands the hardest. A tree with 3 words somehow becomes the heart of the room. That should not work, but somehow it does. Drax is a character who could have gone wrong very easily, because at first glance he looks like the most straightforward member of the team. He is the big warrior, the revenge guy, the muscle, the one whose whole life has been reduced to anger because Ronan took his family from him. And usually in a movie like this, that character ends up being either painfully serious or completely forgettable. But Guardians of the Galaxy finds a surprisingly funny angle with him. Drax is not funny because he is trying to be funny, that is the key. He is funny because he takes everything with such brutal seriousness that normal conversation becomes impossible around him. Metaphors go right past him. Sarcasm does not land the way it is supposed to. Little social cues that everyone else understands somehow become these giant moments of confusion. And Dave Bautista plays that straight-faced delivery really well. He does not wink at the audience. He does not perform Drax like a comedian who knows he has the punchline. He plays him like a man whose entire brain is operating on a completely different rulebook. That makes the humor feel sharper than it probably would have been if the character were constantly trying to be funny. The best thing about Drax's comedy is that it comes from personality, not from random gag writing. He is literal because he sees the world in blunt, direct terms. He says what he means. He hears what people say and takes it at face value. There is almost no filter. And in a group full of sarcasm, manipulation, flirting, lying, and emotional avoidance, that makes him stand out immediately. Everyone else is performing some version of themselves. Drax is just Drax. That creates a lot of funny friction. He interrupts the rhythm, makes scenes awkward, and turns simple exchanges into weird little battles with language.